Morning, church.
Morning.
How's everyone doing today? Beautiful outside. Let me just pray really quick before we get started here. Holy Father, thank you for this beautiful day, Lord. Thank you for the sunshine. Thank you for your creation. It's so beautiful, and we just want to thank you so much for that. Thank you truly for the open arms that you receive us. Thank you so much for the blood of Christ, for the cross, that we're able to come to you, Lord. And thank you for your word, these words that were actually spoken by Jesus, that we can study today, that we can learn from today. I pray you just bless this message, bless this word today, Lord. We lift you up. We love you, Jesus. We pray all this in your name. Amen. All right, so I've been away for like the entire month because I've been preaching at a English ministry church in Surrey. It's called New Hope. They're another Alliance church. And it's funny that because they're younger, my sermons have to be shortened. I can't speak over 30 minutes or else they're already on their phones. So I have to make sure that my sermons are cut exactly 20 to 25 minutes. So sometimes having to rush a sermon through is pretty difficult. So I was happy when I got the opportunity to speak here. That church is growing too. When I first got there was about, I want to say like 15 maybe less than 15. Now we're up in the 20s. We're getting higher up there. So it's awesome. Continue to pray for them as well. So today I'm going to be speaking on, the title of my sermon is called Lost Sons. And I kind of want to convey the love of the Father through this parable told by Jesus. So if you have your Bibles with you today, we're going to start in Luke chapter 15, verses 11 to 24. So I'm going to be reading from the ESV translation. So verse 11. This is Luke 15. I'm starting in verse 11. And he said, there was a man who had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me. And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey to a far-off country, where he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in the country. And he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens in that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread? But I perish here with hunger. I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. Verse 20 goes, and he arose and came to his father. And here's the twist here. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion, and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost, and now he is found. Beautiful story. Author Charles Dickens said, the parable of the lost son is one of the greatest stories of our lifetime. When I was about 15 or 16 years old, me and my dad got into a huge argument. We got into a big fight. And even though now my dad's like my best friend, back then we really butted heads. So we got in a big fight, and I left home. And I had 50 cents in my pocket, and I was out of the house for maybe 1 week or so. And I remember, and some of the other kids are not going to know this, and This might date me a bit, but I went to the gas station, I put the coins in, and I called my friend because there was no cell phones at the time. So there's a thing called payphones, right? So I put in the 50 cents and I called my friend. I said, hey, is it okay if I stay on your couch tonight? Because I got nowhere to stay tonight. And this began my journey of 7 days of sleeping on this couch or sleeping on that couch, eating my friends' scraps, whatever they had left over. Till eventually we were out, and my friend gave me his phone and said, I got a call for you. And it was one of those like Nokia phones with Snake on it. You know, we just play Snake. So he gave me his cell phone, and I answered it. It was his dad. His dad was Christian, good friends with my dad, and he started talking to me, and he said, hey, you have to go home. I said, is there a problem? Or he's like, no, but I spoke to your parents, and you need to go home. And I said, okay. So as I'm going home, I'm expecting that this will probably be the last time that I go home because my mom will kill me. And I'm walking home and I get up to the door and I'm kind of shaking as I'm putting my key in. And even before I could put my key in, the door opens. And this is where it gets a little blurry because I can't remember if it was either my mom or my dad. It was probably both. But they opened the door and right away I got a hug. And I remember I probably flinched because it could have been like a little hit, but I got a hug. And this shocked me. It wasn't until later on that we had a discussion, but they were just happy that I was home. The action that I had caused had consequences. We have to understand that all of your actions that you do have consequences. But that did not change my status in the house. I was still my parents' son. So let me dive a little bit into the text here. Jesus was speaking to a large group of people. And in verse 15, it's all parables. Jesus is what I call parable mode. So he's speaking to Pharisees, he's speaking to scribes. Pharisees kind of taught the religions, they were kind of like the pastors. And the scribes studied religion, so they were kind of like the theologians of the time. Also around Jesus are sinners. And now the Pharisees and scribes are starting to get upset that Jesus is hanging around prostitutes, thieves, and tax collectors. Actually, chapter 14 ends with, "He who has ears, let him hear," because the gospel is for everyone. So Jesus begins chapter 15 with the parable of the lost sheep. A shepherd loses one of his 100 sheep. 100 sheep, he loses one, and he goes and looks for it, and he finds it. The next parable is about a woman who lost one coin, looks all over her house for one coin, all over until she finds it. Both of these parables end with a party and rejoicing. Let's think about that for 1 second. Jesus says that there's actually a party in heaven when just one sinner repents. I don't know about you guys, but for me, I kind of see God as kind of a far-off deity. Someone who is way too busy. Almost to the point where I find it weird to think of God throwing a party. However, he finds joy in his children coming back to him. And listen, it's not when 1 million people turn to God that God celebrates, that he finds his joy. It's not just 1 million, it's not even 10. Jesus said here, when one sinner repents. So after the parable of the lost sheep and the lost coin, Jesus moves on to the parable of the lost son, which is actually about two sons and their father. So the younger son goes to his dad, and he asks for his, this is crazy because he asks for his inheritance. When do you receive an inheritance? When your person that you're getting the inheritance from dies. That's when you receive it. I don't know if I'll have any inheritance from my dad because he goes on vacation a lot. So he's probably, I might not have it. But think about this. If I were to even go to my dad today and say, Dad, I want my inheritance now, right? This is what this kid did. Before his father passed away, he said, give me my inheritance. Give me what's coming to me. And anyone else probably would have smacked that kid, because what he's asking for is, I don't even need you, I just need your money. So he goes and he asks for his inheritance. And because also, we have to keep note that he's the younger son. Because he's the younger son, he would only receive 1/3. He would receive half of what his brother received. And this isn't just money, this is 1/3 of all of his father's belongings. So that's livestock, clothes, food, 1/3 of everything that probably his father needs to live. So he takes everything, he sells it, and goes to a journey to a far-off land. And keep in mind, when he's selling 1/3 of his father's belongings, he's probably trying to get it done. He probably has the mat out garage sale, trying to get all of his dad's stuff out so he can get some cash to leave. So he goes and he sells all his father's stuff, leaves off to a far-off land, and now there's a depression in this land. And because the son had been spending his money like crazy, the separation from his father, it begins to weigh. And that brings me to my first point. Separating yourself from God often begins with pleasure, but ends with pain. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey to a far-off country. And there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. We often think we know what's best, right? Actually, our society is kind of based on do what you feel is right, what you feel is correct. There's an Envision site, similar to the one that we're going to in El Salvador, but it's in Montreal, in Canada. We have an Envision site in Montreal, so they send missionaries into Montreal. And while I was in the conference, at the Envision conference, I was talking to one of the pastors from Montreal. His name is Jeff. He's the youth pastor at a Vietnamese Alliance church there. And he told me that there, Jesus is seen as a fairy tale. Jesus is seen as fantasy. They've come to a point where they no longer need God. But we have to understand that the separation from God begins with pleasure and always, always ends in pain, whether that's in this life or the next. And sometimes we like I said, we're constantly thinking about ourselves. And our society is starting to grow this way. Actually, 88% of kids age 18 leave the church. 88%. In 2008, that was 70%. 18 or higher leave the church. And because we often feel as though we know what we need. And much like the younger son, it ends in pain. So he gets hooked up with a job. And in this job, he's feeding leftovers to pigs. So he's feeding these pigs leftovers. And let's step out of the story for a bit. This is like, what's that movie, Inception, right? Because I'm talking about a story about Jesus talking about a story. So let's step out of it for a bit. This story, Jesus is telling to Pharisees and scribes. And he's talking about a son who is feeding pigs. To the Jewish culture, that would be so taboo. That would be crazy for him to say that. So they're probably all up in arms about Jesus talking about a son who had left his father and started to feed pigs. They're probably grossed out by this. Because not only is the son a disgrace, but now his father is also become a disgrace. Getting a job feeding pigs. And that brings me to my next slide. Our detachment from God leads to our attachment to worldly things. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into the fields to feed pigs. It's funny because we so often give up on God very quick. But when it's our own sin and it's our own behaviors, we'll stoop to the lowest of the low to continue it. Things get so bad that the son starts looking at the pig's food like a snack. Like this is a steak dinner to him. And I had to kind of step out of my own like Western culture. I grew up in Canada, born in Regina. So I had to kind of step out of that and kind of understand how hungry you have to be to eat pig's food. Because I say I'm hungry all the time. You can probably tell. But I say I'm hungry all the time. And I was talking about with Esther, sometimes I'll say I'm so hungry, like we need to eat now. She's like, oh, okay, let's go get some Korean food or something. I had Korean food yesterday, right? Are you really that hungry? When I was a little kid, I was addicted to McDonald's. Obvious, right? And I think it's because they gave you little toys, right? They would give you little toys, and in your head that programmed you, man, that's good, right? That you would get little toys. So whenever, if I have kids, whenever they see McDonald's, I'm going to hit them in the back of the head. So whenever they see McDonald's, they're like, oh, McDonald's hurts. So that's my plan. But when my mom would say, I would go to my mom and I'd say, I'm so hungry, Mom, I'm starving, I'm dying. So okay, yeah, there's some sinigang or there's some food over there. So, but is there a toy? Can we go to McDonald's? So I had to step out to understand the hunger of this person. I've never been starving. I'm blessed to have never been starving. But to understand this, he was not just hungry, he was starving. Actually, in ancient times, people would turn to cannibalism in a famine this severe. But he's so hungry that even the leftover food from the leftover food of the pigs looks appetizing to him. And that's my next slide. Eventually, the lack of morality becomes normality. Eventually, your separation from God's presence leads to a place where your sin becomes normal. You're so desensitized to your surroundings that sometimes you forget, just like him, that I got a heavenly Father. You're heirs with Christ. So the younger son finally comes to his senses and realizes that his dad's workers are actually treated better than he is here. So he writes this script. And this is the part that I love. He writes this script. He writes it and he's getting ready to tell his dad. Right? He has it all ready. Dad, I'm sorry I left. Please forgive me. Right? I've sinned before God and before you. So he goes home and he's rehearsing this. He's probably on the way. Dad, I'm sorry I left. And he's at his driveway, and his dad sees him, and his dad starts running, which actually would be a big deal, especially in Jewish culture, for the man of the house to run. Not only to run, but to run to a son who has disgraced the family. And as he's running, I'm sure the son's like, okay, here we go, I'm ready. His dad comes to him. Dad, I'm sorry I left. But what does his dad do? He hugs him. Give him some clothes. Give him some shoes. Put the family ring on him. Let's have a party. But the story actually doesn't end there. And this is why the title of my sermon was Lost Sons. As we read on, chapter 15, 25 to 32, now his older son was in the field. And as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of his servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has received him back safe and sound." But he was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him. But he answered his father, "Look, these many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him." And he said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found." The older son comes home after a long day of working on his dad's farm. And as he comes home, he starts to hear music. And I'm assuming he's never heard music before because he's so shocked that this is going on. And as you call someone over, say, "Hey, what's going on?" "Oh, your brother's back." Like, "Wait, my brother's back? The one who left us?" Right? We step out again, the Pharisees are probably like, "Yeah, the brother had the right to be upset." The scribes and the Pharisees probably were like, "Yeah, what's wrong with this father?" The older son is an example of a Christian who lives his life for God, but in his obedience, expects things from God. So the older son had what I call 3 killers. The first one being jealousy. Jealousy is the killer of joy. Verse 28 goes, "But he was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him." Jealousy has no place in a Christian's life. Something that's really important is that jealousy often manifests itself when you value your desires above everything else. That's where jealousy shows its face the most. When I think that my desires are higher than yours. So when you receive my desires, there's going to be a problem. Just like the older son, jealousy is the killer of joy. Number 2, comparison is the killer of contentment. Verse 29 goes, "But he answered his father, 'Look, these many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. Look, God, I do everything for you. I pray, I go to Bible study, I go to church all the time. How come I'm not driving a Mercedes right now? Why am I driving a 2001 Toyota Corolla?'" But this is very, very similar to the mentality that we have, especially with dangerous preachers preaching things like prosperity. Comparison is the killer of contentment. I wish I could sing like Daniel. He's not here, so I can talk about it. I wish I could sing like Daniel. Can you imagine? I could serve God so well if I could sing like Daniel. I could sing and then preach right after, right? I could do that. But that's like our mentality sometimes. But did you know that every single person sitting in here, every single person in this seat has a gift from God? What would it look like if instead of comparing all of our gifts, we used it to glorify God? Every single person in here is special. Every single person in here has a gift from God. And lastly, entitlement is the killer of gratitude. "But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him." Can I tell you something? God doesn't owe you anything. That sounds icky to say, but God doesn't owe you anything. Just to wake up in the morning is actually a blessing. Actually, Esther, when she was doing maternity, she told me about the intricacies of pregnancy and childbirth. That in itself is a miracle. That you guys were born out of your mom and are here today, that itself is a miracle. Apostle Paul says in 1 Timothy, "For you were brought into this world with nothing, and nothing you can take from it." So we have the younger son, and we have the older son. Which son do you think was the lost son? Both sons were looking to control their lives. The younger son through independence, but the older son through false obedience. The younger son was looking to control his life. The original sin of Adam and Eve, looking for control. The older son was looking to manipulate his father by being obedient. And in his obedience, expecting something in return. Both sons were lost. The younger son was called to come back home. The older son was called to come back inside. There's still a beautiful ending to this story. And it's the Father's love, which I honestly think should be the title. The title shouldn't be the prodigal son, the lost son. It should be the love of a father. Here's my question today. Which son are you? I'll tell you a story. My dad spoke about this, but last month, and I spoke about this in one of our soul care sessions. Last month, we learned that my mom's tumor is growing back very slowly, and my dad talked to me. He said, "How are you taking this? How are you taking it? Like, how do you perceive this? It's very small. We probably won't have to do anything in a year or two." And I said, "I'm fine. I'm going to go talk to my other father about it." So I went upstairs, I went to my room, and I talked to God. And I could see and I could feel in my countenance that my talk was starting to get angrier and angrier. And I was starting to get upset that this was happening to my mom. And I went to bed. And I started to dream, and God sent me this. And in this dream, I'm walking in a hospital, and I know which hospital this is. And I know where my mom is. And I know this is about 10 years ago. And this is before. This was after my mom's first surgery, and I'm walking in the hospital. And I go to the door. And I open the door. I can smell the hospital, the hospital smell. And I go and I see my mom, she's asleep. This is after the first surgery. She's sitting there, she's asleep. And standing by her bedside was Jesus. And he was saying, in the silence, that I was there in the beginning. What makes you think I'm not here now? Now come back inside. I feel like God put me up here today to tell someone here, to come back. Come back today. The Father is waiting with arms wide open. I wanted to do a type of reflection